I'm a single guy living in a rural area of Georgia. I moved out of my parents' home into this house located miles away from civilization. It's a cheap yet decent house that is in a wide open field next to a forest. The house itself is old, seemingly built in the early 1900s. Why did I choose this house? For one, I like the peace and quiet of the rural area. I'm not a big people person and I prefer to keep to myself. Whenever I'm not working at my job in the closest town, I'm at home either reading books, taking a walk through the field, watching TV, or playing the banjo that I've owned since I was a kid. Second, as I've stated, it was cheap and it was big enough to contain all of my valuables, including my vast DVD and Blu-ray collection, which I've been building as long as I can remember. Overall, it's not the best house, but considering my budget, it was my best option. Or maybe it wasn't. The first month that I lived here was normal. I went through my daily routine of going to my job, and then either going to the movie theater or going all the way back home, and dabbling in my various hobbies. Life was good. Up until a certain night. During a particular chilly night, I was sleeping in my cozy bed like a baby when all of a sudden, I was awoken by a loud sound. The sound of an animal. But it wasn't an animal that I'd ever heard. Bewildered, I stood up in my bed and I listened very closely. The first thing I noticed was that the usual sounds of the night weren't. No crickets, no wind, nothing. And then I heard it again. This animalistic sound. I tried identifying it, but I could not for the life of me recognize what it could be. It sounded like a combination of a cat hissing and a gorilla scream. It was high-pitched and it sounded like it was nearby. I looked over to the window next to me, and I could not believe what I was seeing. Instead of seeing the pitch-black darkness of the night, I only saw the color white beyond the window. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and I pinched myself to make sure that I was awake. Indeed, I was awake, and every time I looked out the window, all I saw was whiteness. Flabbergasted, I got out of my bed and I walked over to the window. Upon further inspection, I noticed that it was moving. More like floating. It was fog. At first, I thought it was silly that I got myself worked up over a bit of fog. However, as I thought about it, the fact that there was fog was very strange. The weather conditions weren't right, and there was barely any clouds during the day. Plus, this fog was especially thick. I could hardly see more than a couple feet outside. I walked around my house and I looked out all of the windows, and sure enough, the fog was in front of all of them. My house was completely surrounded in a thick fog. I didn't understand what was going on. Was this an elaborate prank? Was my state newt? Am I going crazy? Suddenly, I heard that noise again, and another and another. Strange sounds that I'd never heard of in my life. They were coming from all directions and they all sounded close. I started to panic and I sat in my living room chair. I slapped myself and yet I didn't wake up, 100% confirming that I wasn't in a freakish nightmare. My body was shaking. The hairs on my head were pointing up, and I felt my anxiety skyrocket. Get a hold of yourself, I said to myself. There was a pause in the ghoulish noises, and I was able to relax. I closed my eyes and I meditated. I focused on my breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I continued counting for God knows how long. After a while, I stopped. I felt my body relax and a sense of relief came over me. That didn't last long though. After 10 seconds, I suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and I looked around. The door, the window, nothing there. The window to my left, nothing there. To my right, my God. I gazed at the window and what I saw was something that still haunts my nightmares to this day. Outside of the window peering in was a creature. It wasn't human. It didn't even look like an animal. Its eyes were charcoal black. It had a gaping mouth that contained razor-sharp teeth. Its skin was a sickly pale green, and it was about 6'5" in height. It was tall enough that its head reached the top of the window. Worst of all, it was pressed up against the window, staring right at me. My adrenaline kicked in, and despite the fear, I managed to get up and run upstairs to my room. I grabbed my handgun, kept safe in a locked closet, and I ran back downstairs for a possible confrontation. When I came back to the window, I almost screamed. The creature opened the window and was halfway inside. Yes, I had my windows unlocked. Dumb idea, I know, considering that my closest neighbor was 2 miles away, and it would take a while for the police to arrive at my house in the case of an intruder. But I genuinely felt safe with how isolated I was, and I opened my windows a lot to get a breeze. This, however, was a wake-up call. I pointed my gun at the thing and I shot at it several times. It made an ear-piercing cry and it bolted back outdoors. I closed the window and I locked it. Next, I went around my house and I made sure all the windows and doors were closed and locked. As I was doing this, the images of that creature ran in my mind. When it was reaching inside of my house, I saw more of its body. Its body was somewhat slender, and its arms were freakishly long. What made it even more unreal was the fact that it had 3 long prongs sticking out of its hand instead of fingers. It was unlike anything that I had ever seen. What was this creature? What would have happened if it would have gotten all the way through? Did it have anything to do with the fog? My mind raced as much as my feet did, as I ran around my home, praying that whatever that thing was did not enter my home through another opening. Or who knows, there could be other things out there. After a thorough inspection, I was relieved when I checked all the windows and doors and there didn't seem to be any intruders. Everything was now on lockdown. I tried calling the police, but my phone couldn't get a signal. The fog must have been messing with my phone signal. I reloaded my gun and I sat once again in my living room chair, waiting for the next confrontation. I don't know how long I was sitting in that chair for. All I know was that I was on high alert. I listened for every little sound. I stared out of the windows, expecting something to crash through it. The noises kept going on and off. I didn't know what was out there and how many of them there were. The feeling of anxiety and anticipation kept me awake and aware. Occasionally, I spotted some figures outside. Some of them flew by like hawks. Some crawled on the windows, and I could tell they were mutated bugs or something similar. Some of them were so big that I could only see their legs. I was half expecting a giant foot to come crashing down through the roof and squish me. The situation I was in was just so bizarre. It felt like one of those horror movies that I watch frequently. The more I dwelled on it, I began to realize the possible consequences. Will this fog ever go away? Is this fog just covering my house? For all I know, the fog could have came down and covered the entire earth, creating a bleak and blinding apocalypse that will end the world. Despite all of this, I somehow managed to eventually fall asleep. When I woke up, I quickly checked my surroundings. The first thing I checked was the windows, and it was at that moment that I breathed a sigh of relief. The morning light came in unfiltered, and I observed the trees and the blue sky. My property was clear of the fog. I smiled wider than I had in a long time. Maybe that was just a nightmare. A realistic, crazy nightmare. But that's the thing. It felt too real. However, I brushed that feeling off and I went outside to enjoy the fresh air. I stood on my porch, gazing at the beautiful sights, happy to see nature again. The trees were slightly moving in the wind. There were a couple of rabbits roaming about, searching for food. The flowers in my front yard were pretty as always. I liked their bright colors. The dandelions have such a vibrant yellow color to them. And as for the roses, I admire them for their red leaves and the red stems. Wait, red stems? I was taken aback when I noticed there was a bunch of red on my lawn. Upon closer inspection, it looked like blood. No way this is real. I got a flashback to when I put several bullets into that thing last night. Was it real? I walked around my house and I was disturbed by some of the things that I discovered. First, I saw a trail of blood leading from the window where I shot the creature to a spot in my front yard where I first discovered the blood. Not only that, but I noticed that the trail doesn't lead anywhere. Not to my front door, and not to any direction where the forests are, where the creature could be hiding. Second, I saw signs of other monstrosities congregating close to my house. I saw scratches on my back window. There were footprints circling my house. How do I know there were footprints without there being any mud or snow? Because whatever this creature was, it was heavy enough to leave clear footprints in the goddamn grass. They were very noticeable footprints, similar to those of a bear, except a bit bigger and more triangular. I sprinted back inside and I checked the windows. They were all locked like I had them last night. Upstairs, I saw my gun closet open, just as I had left it in a rush. I tried denying the reality of it all, coming up with excuses for how all these things could have happened just like in my dream. But no, this is reality. What happened last night was real. But if that's the case, what happened to the fog? And what happened to everything that was in it? For the rest of the day, I stayed inside contemplating what happened. Thankfully, it was my day off, or else I would not have been able to concentrate on my work. I went through my routine of tidying up the house, then relaxing and watching TV, and then meditating. I managed to clear my head up and my anxiety eased. I avoided talking about the fog to anyone, as I don't want to be seen as crazy. And plus it sounds so fictitious that people would automatically assume that I'm joking. I kept myself busy until the nighttime, where I had to prepare for work the next day. At this point, I thought whatever was up with that fog, it was a one-time phenomenon. I look back on that thought and I think, I was so naive. After my night routine of taking a shower, putting on deodorant, and brushing my teeth, I went into my bedroom with my pajamas on, clean and feeling good. At this point, it was a little past 10 p.m. I closed my eyes and I prepared to fall asleep any second, when suddenly, I heard noises. My eyes opened wide and my heartbeat accelerated. I heard footsteps right outside of my house. Big, loud footsteps. I hesitantly looked at my window and sure enough, the fog was back. I jumped out of bed and I made sure every entrance was closed and locked again. The noises of indescribable roars and cries happened again. It was a repeat of the other night. After checking that my house was secured, I ran to my bedroom and I retrieved the gun again. I closed the curtains and I locked the bedroom door. I slid into bed, holding my gun in fear. I wanted to stay up for a while, to be prepared for a monster crashing through a door or window and trying to get to me. But I needed to get some sleep. I couldn't afford to start work tomorrow tired and groggy. I forced myself to sleep by meditating and counting numbers. Despite the anxiety and fear, I managed to fall asleep after a while. My alarm woke me up at 6 a.m. like usual. As soon as I had opened my eyes, I grabbed my gun and I pointed it around the room, ready for something to be there to try and charge at me. Fortunately, there was no such creature. Thank heavens, I said. I turned the alarm off and I went through my morning routine. As I went outside to go to my car, I noticed brand new footprints and even some green ooze that I had never seen before. I shrugged it off and I drove to work. The rest of my day was the same business as usual. Again, I didn't bring up the fog at all, and I didn't bother to contact the police. Even with the evidence in my yard, they would just say that it was wildlife and that I should get a dog to scare them off. Only I knew the terrors of the fog. Only I knew that a dog would not save me if I ever even dared to go outside at night. I wanted to get away from that house immediately, to move away and never see it again. Unfortunately, I had spent most of my savings on that house. It would take me years, perhaps decades if I didn't move up in the workplace, to buy another house, and I was too embarrassed to move back in with my parents. Plus, I couldn't think of a logical excuse why I would move out of a seemingly normal house so quickly, without bringing up the fog and sounding like a lunatic. I was alone in my dilemma. I was stuck in this cursed house, doomed to repeat the nightly horror surrounding me, doomed to sleep through the horrific noises and the constant anxiety of something breaking into my house and getting me every night. I started boarding up my windows and I installed some extra locks on my front and back doors. It was something to ease my fear. I don't care if I look like a lunatic to anyone who visits me or happens to drive by my house. I was more safe from those things. I could no longer play my banjo long into the night like I used to. I would keep my gun next to me every night, in case I would have to deal with the worst case scenario. As for how the fog appears, that's the interesting part. It seems to appear around 10 p.m. and stay until 5 a.m. Some nights, I stare outside, observing where the fog comes from. It always seems to come down from the sky. Where exactly, I don't know. I was always too afraid to go outside and stand out there to observe where exactly it came from. It's not worth it. The fog comes down so fast that even if I stood just 15 feet from my front door, and I tried to run back as it came down, there's a good chance that something would already be in the fog and drag me further into it, killing and possibly eating me. As for why the fog approaches this particular house, your guess is as good as mine. It's possible that it happens to other houses, but asking people if a fog surrounds their house at night is something you don't tend to ask people during small talk. All I know is that as long as I live in this house, I am cursed to live in this never-ending nightmare.